I'm very honored and excited to have President Tilghman here to give us a talk. She's not from our area, but it turns out that there are great women in other fields as well. So I'll tell you about a little bit about Professor Tilghman. I mean, there's just so much. I had read about her since we invited her and we were supposed to prepare this presentation, and it's really wonderful. Her full name is Shirley. I don't know what the M stands for, but Tilghman. And she was elected president of Princeton. She's the 19th president, and she's been serving as president since 2001. She's an exceptional teacher and a world-renowned scholar and leader in the field of molecular biology. And she served on the Princeton faculty before she became president for 15 years. She received her bachelor's in chemistry from Queen's University in Princeton, Ontario. And then, this is, I thought, fascinating, and worked in Sierra Leone for 2 years. Very interesting to know, but I'll leave you to talk about whatever you decided to know what you've done. And then she got her PhD in biochemistry from Temple University. During postdoctoral studies in the National Institute of Health, she made a number of groundbreaking discoveries by participating in cloning the first mammalian gene, and then continued to make scientific breakthroughs as an independent investigator at the Institute of Cancer Research in Philadelphia, and an adjunct associate professor of human genetics and biochemistry and biophysics at Tilghman. President Tilghman came to Princeton in 1986 as the Howard A. Pryor Professor of the Life and Sciences. And then 2 years later, she joined the Howard Hughes Medical Institute as an investigator. In '98, she took additional responsibilities as the founding director of Princeton's multidisciplinary Louis Ziegler Institute of Interactive Genomics. And as you saw before, our speaker before, Mona Singh, is part of that organization. So you see how everything ties in. She's a member of the National Research Council's committee that set the blueprint for the U.S. effort in the Human Genome Project, and was one of the founding members of the National Advisory Council of the Human Genome Project for the National Institute of Health. She's also a national leadership on behalf of women in sciences, and I see that, for president, like this magnitude of university to come to this workshop, I really see that it implies the commitment to these issues. And she's promoting efforts to make the early careers of young scientists as meaningful and productive as possible. From '93 to 2000, she chaired Princeton Councils on Science and Technology, which encourages the teaching of science and technology to students outside the sciences. And in '96, she received the Princeton's President's Award of Distinguished Teaching. She initiated the Princeton Postdoc Teaching Fellowship Program across all sciences and engineering disciplines that brings postdoc students to Princeton each year to gain experience in both research and teaching. In 2002, President Tilghman was one of 5 winners of the L'Oreal UNESCO Award for Women in Science, and in the following year, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society for Developmental Biology. In 2007, she was awarded the Genetic Society of America Medal for outstanding contributions to her field. She's a member of the American Philosophical Society, the National Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Medicine, and the Royal Society of London. She is a trustee of the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace and the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and she's a director on the Google Board. So I think that really there is, after this, and I'm sure the talk, there is no question that we should be so honored to have President Tilghman here. So please help me welcome her.
Good morning. Let me try that one again. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So that's a good start, because what I would like to do this morning is to have this be a conversation amongst ourselves, rather than my standing here and speaking for 50 minutes. That is the practice of most professors, of course. They can get up on their feet immediately. It's a 50-minute talk. But I would much rather hear more about what is on your minds as you are pursuing your careers in computer science. As I was walking over, I was trying to think about the value of having symposia or meetings or workshops like this one, where you gather together women all interested in the same fundamental field. And I think the primary importance is just that you get to talk science together, which is what brought you into the field in the first place, is a love of computer science, and it is the thing that all of you share. So I'm sure lots of good science is being discussed at this workshop. But the other thing it does strike me is that we are still in a time when sisterhood, and whatever that means to you, is still enormously valuable. When I look back on my own career in science, my women friends are among the most cherished part of my career as a molecular geneticist. We met as graduate students at meetings. We didn't all go to the same university, but we would meet at meetings. We continued those friendships as postdoctoral fellows. We started our careers together, supporting each other as we had families, and managed that incredibly challenging task of balancing a passion for science with a passion for your children, which is incredibly important. At least certainly was to me. We commiserated, we supported each other, we really were a support system for one another. And all those things that you hear about women not being supportive of each other, frankly, that was not my experience. My experience was that women were enormously supportive of each other. And so I hope what is happening at this workshop is that you are beginning to make those kinds of friendships that will really be meaningful to you as you pursue your careers in computer science. Now, if I could wave my magic wand and have the world be organized as I would like it to be organized, I would probably be standing here saying to a mixed gender audience everything that I just said. Having a workshop, it's on theoretical computer science, it's the field that you really care about. You are having great conversations, you're finding friends who will support you throughout the rest of your careers, and it would have been absolutely the same for the male students as for the female students. And frankly, when I was starting my career, I would have expected by 2010 that would be the case. I think those of us who were in the trenches in the 70s and the 80s really believed we were fighting for the rights of women so that you wouldn't have to sit in this single gender audience. And here, frankly, because the field of computer science is still not as welcoming or as open to the careers for women as I believe it should be. So it's a little bit of a disappointment, frankly, that we are still having this conversation 40 years after I started such conversations as a beginning graduate student in the fall of 1971. But it is what it is. And so the fact that you are here and with each other, I think will help. And I hope all of you are thinking that in 40 years, you will not be standing where I am in front of such an audience. And part of the reason I say that, obviously, is because when I think back on the people who were most supportive of my career and who I look to, they weren't just women. Of course they weren't. I had male mentors, and almost by definition I had to have male mentors. There were no female mentors when I started out. And who were to this day, I think, supportive of what I was doing in science and supportive of my desire to pursue a career in science. So I really do believe we will come to a point where meetings like this are not necessary, but they are, and so be it. I think it is the case that I have spent an enormous fraction of my career trying to promote opportunities for women in the sciences broadly read, and STEM fields in general. And of course, it was driven by very personal experience. It was driven by the fact that I was a woman in science, and that although I think I experienced very little overt discrimination, I can probably count on one hand the number of incidents where I could really say, this was just a bizarre example of discrimination. I was sensible enough to recognize that such discriminations existed at that time, and to a certain extent, I think still exist today. My perspective as university president has to be slightly different. It sort of has to move from the personal to the global, and so I would like to just, in a couple of minutes, give you a sense of why I think this is such an important issue. And not from the personal perspective, but from the perspective of someone leading one of the world's great research universities. So it begins with the critical importance that science and technology is going to play in the future of not just this country, although that's one of the things that I have to be thinking about because we are here in the United States, but in fact progress everywhere in the world. I believe that progress in science and technology can improve the quality of human life. And it can do so in poor countries, it can do so in rich countries. And having a vibrant and creative workforce in science and engineering, mathematics, is absolutely critical for the future. And clearly, that workforce is going to look different than it has looked in the 20th century. It is going to be less white. It is going to be less sort of Americo-European-centric. It's going to come from all over the globe, not just Europe and the United States, which really were the leaders in the 20th century, and it is going to be female. And if we can't open the gates for all of those people to pursue careers in science, engineering, and mathematics, then we're going to be losing a very significant fraction of the potential innovative, creative workforce. So pure self-interest should guide our science policy in this area. Leaving out half of the world's population makes no sense at all if you believe in the importance of progress. So I think that's number one. Number two is that as women become more and more well integrated into other professions, into medicine, into law, even into business, science and technology is going to start looking anachronistic if it hasn't solved this problem. It's going to look like an outlier. It's going to look like a field that there's something wrong with it. And I would argue it is going to become less and less attractive to men as well as women. So I think that the whole sense of having science and technology left behind as women become more and more integrated into the workforce is a real risk, once again, to, I think, the future of the fields. The third is probably controversial, and if you believe it's controversial, you should push back at me. But I've seen it, and I believe it. I think women by including women in the scientific workforce, you increase the kinds of problems that are worked on. It's not the same as saying that women do science differently. I'm not saying that at all. I think women do science exactly the same way as men do science. But I think would intrigue women, the kind of problems that a woman might really find interesting to work on, are not, these aren't separate sets. But I think there are examples of science that I have seen in my lifetime done by women, where it's almost impossible to imagine a man having worked on that problem. Some of it's cultural, some of it is, the problem is just one that I've watched scores of women head into the field in a way that I didn't see scores of men sort of running into the field. My favorite example of this, just to give you a flavor for it, is Liz Blackburn, one of my great heroes in science. She won the Nobel Prize last year. Losing track of Nobel Prizes. For discovering the structure at the ends of chromosomes. And this had been a long-standing problem. There were really interesting mechanistic issues associated with how, when you replicate a chromosome, the way chromosomes are replicated, if you don't have a separate mechanism to replicate the very ends of the chromosomes will gradually get shorter and shorter and shorter, and eventually you'll start losing your own genes. And so it was a really deep problem. And lots of people have been working on this. And lots of people have been working on it in what I call the National Security Council of Organisms. These are organisms that everybody works on. These are mice and flies and worms and yeast and not bacteria, because they have circular chromosomes. They don't need ends. Liz started working on this problem in an organism that no one else was working on, called Tetrahymena, which is a unicellular organism that lives in ponds, and you will know it as pond scum. It really is the green, gucky stuff that floats on the surface of ponds, and no one ever wanted to work on Tetrahymena. And Liz, because it's not, she was an N of one working on the field at the time, but she had an incredibly clever reason for why that was the right organism to work on telomeres, the ends of chromosomes. And it was absolutely critical that she work on that organism, because that's where the Tetrahymena has many, many, many tiny little chromosomes, so lots of ends. Whereas we have very, very long chromosomes and therefore very few ends. And so, but she really was working alone on this problem. Everybody kind of thought she was nutty to work on this organism. It didn't have tools, it didn't have this, it didn't have that. And I think she was happy to kind of be in her little backwater in the pond scum in ways that I didn't see my male colleagues interested in having that kind of an experience. And in the end of the day, she won a Nobel Prize for this kind of independent approach to what she did. And I could give you other examples of this, but I've seen it over and over again. And I'd be curious to know if you see it. But I do believe that women expand the universe of things that scientists work on. And then the last thing, and then I'm going to stop, which I think does come back to the personal, which is, I think it's deeply unfair, unethical to create a field that is as interesting as computer science, and then structured in such a way that it is unwelcoming or where there are barriers for the entry of women or underrepresented minorities for that. It's just unfair, and we shouldn't be supporting, particularly in universities that have a responsibility to educate men and women students. We should not accept cultural norms in a field that seem to work against the inclusion of women. I think it's unfair, it's unethical. So those are my 4 reasons for continuing to care about this field, and I am going to stop there and open the floor to any questions about anything that I've said, or I'd love to hear your reactions to anything I've said, or to hear a little bit about your own experiences in computer science and whether I have represented them correctly or not. So who would like to start? Yes.
They're having issues this week, so I will get started. So I want to know, I found your last point fascinating, that you think that it's something about the structure of computer science that you think that is barring women from entering. So I'm sure you don't have a full answer that you can say exactly, but what is your thought about what is in the structural setting of this field that is not good for women, or preventing them from?
Well, I think it begins with expectations. And expectations that get built into the way we think about the abilities of men and women, as reflected in any given discipline. And obviously this is different from discipline to discipline. And I think these expectations used to be overt and expressed. And I'll just give you an example from my own experience. I told you that I could probably count on only one hand the number of overt instances of discrimination that I have experienced. And one of them was a physics professor in college, who, when I had done something really stupid, absolutely stupid, in a laboratory, came up and said, "That's why there are no women in physics." Now, it's politically incorrect to say that anymore. And my guess is, has anyone had something equivalent to that happen to them? Yes, you have. So maybe it's not so politically incorrect. What happened?
When I was in high school, I had a teacher who would overtly say, when a woman asked a question in his math class, "Don't waste our time because you won't need to know that when you're a housewife."
Yeah. So yeah, and I'll give you one last example because it also happened to what didn't happen to me, but happened to a woman who was an assistant professor here at Princeton, who won the prize in her undergraduate college for having the highest GPA in, I guess she was in biology, and was told she wasn't getting the prize because it just wouldn't make any sense to give it to a girl because she was not going to be able to take advantage of all the benefits that come from the prize, which is the ability to support your graduate career. So the assumption of this college was that she wasn't going to be a scientist, and so why give her the prize? So I think those kind of very overt remonstrances happen less and less. And that may be the great accomplishment of my generation, is that we've made it more difficult. But that's very different than saying that these things aren't embedded in our culture. And there's lots of social science research that show that those biases still exist. They're just not said. And so it has to do with expectations, and it has to do when you enter graduate school or when you apply for a faculty position or a postdoctoral honorific fellowship, whether the person sifting through the file is looking at your name, which has a gender attached to it, and saying, well, is she really serious? I mean, is this someone who's really going to set the field on fire? Is this likely to really be the next Nobel laureate or Fields Medal winner or Turing Award winner? Is that really likely? So I think that still exists. And then I think computer science, and I shouldn't be talking about computer science because obviously I'm not one and you are, but I think there are cultural norms that begin in early teenagehood, if not earlier, that have to do with what is socially acceptable. You know, it is socially acceptable for a 13-year-old boy to spend his entire life in his bedroom with the door closed and the curtains drawn, coding in C++. It's much less socially acceptable for a girl to spend her adolescence in that way. And that creates, you know, what feels by the time you're 18 and you're starting college, like an uneven playing field. That you're having, you know, I'm seeing nods, so I think this is resonating, having to play catch up. Yeah.
I just want to add something regarding the expectations. Usually when I meet people and I say I'm doing my PhD in computer science, even if I meet women, they say, oh, you must be really brilliant to be able to do that. But then when you meet a guy who's saying he's doing his PhD in computer science, oh, that's good for you. Like, so if you're a woman in that area, then you should be really, really, really smart to be able to get it. Which sets that you shouldn't expect to see a woman there, because if she's okay, she would go, I don't know, do whatever, any other degree, but because she's really, really, really smart, then she can survive this field, which is, it doesn't give justice to, I don't know how much a woman can be smart, I don't know.
No, I think you put your finger on a very, very important thing, which is that the exceptionalism that comes with a woman who is ambitious in a field that is not traditionally associated with success for women. And that can be a burden, and it's something you could also take advantage of, right? Yeah. Yeah. And it is this issue of self-confidence. I think it's a combination of self-confidence and stubbornness. And those two things are really critical, along with a sense of humor, I think, to really succeed in science as a woman. But there are many studies that show that the issue of self-confidence, sort of normalizing for sheer intelligence, becomes a really critical issue. Really critical issue. I was just talking to one of my colleagues this morning about reading an article in our student newspaper. This would have been 15 years ago, about two incoming freshmen who had both won the Westinghouse Science Prize, you know, the high school prize for the best science project. And one was a man, one was a woman, and they interviewed the man. And said, oh, I had this great project. It was fantastic. It was so cool. It was, you know, everyone loved it, and of course I won. The woman said, I'm so surprised. You know, I liked the project. I didn't expect anyone else to think it was really terrific. And, you know, I kept getting, you know, to the next level, and I'm just so thrilled. That kind of thing, right? As opposed to, and it comes back to your point too, her saying, I really did a good job on this. I should have won this prize. It's a challenge. Really a challenge, yeah.
So I read that one of the reasons that women are somewhat underrepresented in professoriate types of positions, even though there's more and more women PhDs, is partially because of the slowing of the academic job market. So, I mean, hiring just isn't happening at the same rate that would bring this new flood of PhDs into professoriate. And I was wondering, like, how do you think about mediating the situation for women in computer science or other technical fields where women are underrepresented while you still have professoriate, which looks like this is a discipline performed by men.
Yeah. You know, there have been a lot of studies to look at the question of why the professoriate is actually significantly behind the PhD cohort. And, you know, the classical explanation for years and years and years is the delay in the pipeline. That the pipeline, as it gets better and better and better, meaning more and more women in receiving PhDs, that it was going to the problem was going to take care of itself. And yet, study after study, particularly in the last decade, when we have big enough numbers that we can really do meaningful studies, suggest the pipeline cannot explain the underrepresentation of women in the professoriate in science and mathematics. And I'll just give you sort of the numbers from my own field because I happen to know them very, very well. We are now in molecular biology at 50-50 PhDs. So we are at gender neutrality. You look at the applicant pool for assistant professorships in molecular biology, not just at Princeton, but across the country in institutions like us, 25%. That's true in chemistry as well. Chemistry hasn't quite gotten to 50%, but its applicant pool for faculty positions is about 25% also. So what's happening? And it can't be explained by the the compaction in the job market. That just doesn't explain it. Here's what I'm most worried about is the explanation is by the time you've received your PhD, and in my field, and I know your field is much better than this, my field is notorious for having long PhDs and then long postdocs. You know, it's not uncommon to have a 5-year postdoc. So if you do the math, you know, by the time you have done a PhD and a postdoc, you're in your 30s. And you're looking at your biological clock. And you're saying, you know, it's now or never. And how am I going to have children and start a very, very demanding career simultaneously? And so my explanation for what is happening and why we can't get that pipeline to represent the applicant pool for academic jobs is that we have yet, as universities, and this is our fault, created work environments that say to women in their 20s, in their 30s, come, this is a great place to have a family. This is a great place. You don't have a boss. That's actually a really incredibly good thing that you don't have a boss. I mean, you know, I know women who are in very demanding careers also like the law, who, you know, tomorrow they could be told they have to be in Shanghai. Drop whatever it is you're doing, and tomorrow you've got to get on the plane to go to Shanghai. Nobody ever tells a university professor to do that. So you have a lot of flexibility built in to your lifestyle. So I think we have, what we've been working on at Princeton is creating many, many, many different programs that say, as clearly as we can, we are going to make this a family-friendly environment for everybody, for our graduate students, for our postdocs, for our faculty. We're not going to ask you to choose between work and play. We're going to figure out ways in which you can do both of these and do them well without the kind of anxiety and conflict that I think deters so many women from thinking that they can come in and have that kind of career.
So,
Yeah.
I have something that's sort of like echo now and don't when some of the girls who came into
Rachel, speak up, please.
some of the girls who came into the PhD program, they're very ambitious and they want to be a faculty. By the end, towards the end of the PhD, when we talked to them, they were like, oh, not so sure anymore because I look at my advisor who works such long hours every day, and when she or he went through the systemship for the faculty job, it was like, yeah, nobody asks you to work for more than 9 hours per day, but they do every day, like voluntarily. So if that's a fact, then
Right.
what can we?
So that's a very fair. Did everybody hear the question? Do you want me to? Did you hear the question in the back? So I think it's an absolute phenomenon. We see it at Princeton. We see it, nationally, which is by the time you have watched what it means to be a faculty member, particularly at a very competitive university, you have decided that this is just not for you. So the first thing I would say about that, I think that's a completely legitimate response. And I don't think we should, in any way, put a value judgment on someone who says, I have looked at the challenges of being a faculty member, and I've decided I would just rather work in a different environment. I would rather, whether it is go to a big company, or whether to go to a small liberal arts college, or work in industry. There are lots of other options, and I think one of the things we should not be saying to graduate students is that there is only one avenue that we define as success, and that is being a professor. That's nutty. So that's number one. Number two, I think, I had my children when I was an assistant professor. And most of my friends had their children, either when they were postdocs or when they were assistant professors. And I'm not saying that was easy, but let's be really clear about that. And you had to be very disciplined in the sense that you had that a lot of things that give pleasure in life, taking pottery classes and, going to the movies and, having long vacations with friends went out the window. Right? So you really, at the end of the day, you did two things. You worked for 8 hours a day, and then you came home and you forgot about work. And you really spent as much time as you possibly could with your children. And if you're willing to have the self-confidence, this comes back to self-confidence again, to say, I can only work 8 hours a day. That's all I can do. And be a mom, or be a dad, for that matter, if you're going to be a good dad. And that's just going to have to be enough. It's just going to have to be enough. And when I'm at work, I work. I don't, sit around and read the newspaper. I don't have long conversations with my friends. I don't, kibitz. I work. And I'm disciplined in those hours. I use every second possible. So I've described what may, to some of you, sound like an incredibly horrible life. So what drives somebody to want to do that? And I think the answer is that you just love what you're doing. And if you don't love it, I don't think it's worth it. There's so few rewards in science, really. You're not becoming a scientist to be rich. You're not likely, unless you're one of these incredible people, to become famous. You're not, But what you can do is you can do what you love. No one can tell you what to do. I mean, that's also the part about not having a boss. If you come in one day and decide you want to work on something completely different, no one can tell you can't do that. You can do it. So there are real perks to the job, but making sure that you love it enough, that you're willing to give up a lot of the, frankly, some of the real pleasures in life, which is leisure, luxury. But for me, it was a trade-off that made sense. I could justify that trade-off in my mind because I loved what I was doing.
So, Charikar, I have another question. Maybe the last related is when you get issues. But talk with many class students, and all they feel is they were very, very disciplined when they were in college. They're very on top of all the courses, on top of the homeworks. They're always like,
Yep.
But once they come to grad school, started to doing research, for some reason unknown, this schedule just sort of became very loose. And you guys have this kind of feeling I definitely have. Somehow it becomes harder to impose a structure on what we do. And I agree with you, it would be very nice if you can spend 8 hours very focused, concentrated. If that's the case, I think 8 hours per day is enough.
Yeah.
But then what often also happens is that we do theoretical computer science and then we think a lot. So if you really sit one day, keep continue reading paper or keep discussing with people, by the end of the day, I really have a headache. I don't know how to resolve this sort of question, like bringing structure, being like organized in this type of extremely unstructured work that we do. And I don't know if you have any good tips on that.
You know, I think it's an issue for all graduate students, not just in science. I think if there were a group of humanist graduate students here right now, they would tell you exactly the same issues that they deal with, which is, you know, as a graduate student, you suddenly go from a highly structured life, you know, where you have classes and exams and schedules and deadlines, to suddenly you've got to decide for yourself. And all I can tell you is that unless you find that inner discipline, it's going to be hard. I think you have to figure out how to make as much of your time count as possible without giving yourself a headache or driving yourself crazy. And so one of the things thinking about is how to and I don't mean to get over analytical about this, but what is the work rhythm that it works best for you? And it could be, you know, 3 hours of working and then 2 hours of just going for a walk, reading a novel, eating ice cream, you know, whatever. And that is actually part of work in the sense that if you don't do that, the next hour is not going to be productive anyway. So try different work habits and see which is the one that seems to work the best for you. Yes.
Has the way that you think about problems and barriers and potential solutions changed at all since you became president?
Probably not the way I think about them, but my ability to do something about them. And that is one of the great joys, I have to say, of being president, is that we have been able to institute some child care policies that I'm really proud of. Doing things like making it possible to take your baby to a meeting, to a scientific meeting, so that you're not having to make that choice. And I think it helps enormously that I was in that position once. And I can write down the list of all the things that made it harder, and now we're trying to figure out ways to make it easier for this generation. So that's the big difference. You can actually change things as president, which is great. Yeah.
How being the president affected your research career? Do you think that did?
It killed it. Basically, I tried to keep my lab going for about 4 years, and it was really impossible. All of you know that to really be effective in this field, in your field, you have to be thinking about your work. You have to be going to scientific meetings. You have to be going to seminars. getting stimulation, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I could feel myself becoming less and less effective as a scientist. So eventually I closed the lab and admitted that whatever I do next, it is probably not going to go back to the lab.
Okay. And obviously you think it's worth it, right? Because you're still doing it. So. What was the question? Like you think it's worth it to sometimes like prioritize and sacrifice maybe part of your research career or the career that you set up to do versus some other opportunity that you have. You want to do.
I'll tell you the way I thought about it. By the time I became president, which was 9 years ago, I knew someplace inside me that I had done the best work I was going to do. I knew that. You can tell, right? You can tell. And so what I was looking at is I could continue to do what I was doing, and I wasn't going to embarrass the university. It wasn't that I had completely lost it, but I wasn't likely to make the kind of discoveries that I had made in the past. Versus take a university that I loved and believed in deeply and make it a better place. And when I weighed those two things, it seemed like the right choice was to do this. And I certainly have never regretted it. So, yes?
So you were talking earlier about the pipeline, and how it's less a pipeline problem now, and more something else that's decreasing the number of women in the professoriate. And I was wondering if you know, so I think you were saying there are about 50% PhDs in the field, and then about 25% actually applying. And I was wondering if you know how many actually get jobs from applying, and how the hiring committees are doing on this issue.
So the good news is that if you are in the applicant pool, your chances of getting the job are gender neutral. If once you get the job, now that's true nationally. I don't know the next figure nationally. I only know it at Princeton. If you get the job, your chances of getting tenure are identical, whether you're male or female. In my field, again, if you have a position where you can apply for an NIH grant, which is the big grant in our field, completely gender neutral, whether your chances of getting that grant. So once you're in the door, the playing field looks pretty even from in my own field. I don't know if you have any sense in computer science. I'm less conversant with the specific numbers at each stage of the career. But I think it's getting into the door.
As you've kind of made these changes at Princeton and trying to make it a more family-friendly place, have you seen concrete improvements in people's perception of it in that way, or have you seen a broader applicant pool interested in coming, or what's the effect of it?
It's probably too early and the numbers are too small to be able to say on a statistical basis that these changes have really had an impact. But there is no question in terms of things like when we are trying to hire a young woman assistant professor, these things all matter and they count, and we sell them like crazy when we're talking to women applicants. So I'm absolutely certain it's increased our success rate, absolutely. And I think it's increased our I think the morale of women, both students and faculty here at Princeton. The program that I think was the most innovative is a program that I started only reluctantly because my plan all my life was I was going to start this business when I retired. The business is as follows. Now at Princeton, any student, fellow, faculty member can call this number at 7 in the morning and say, my child just woke with a fever. I have a lecture that I have to go to, I have to give at 9 o'clock. I need someone by 9 o'clock who's qualified, who's certified, who will come and sit with my sick child who can't go to school. Or, you know, the Maytag refrigerator delivery man is coming at 10 o'clock. That's exactly when my class is. I need someone to sit at the house at 10 o'clock and let the repairman in. And for $10, you can get that service, anybody at Princeton. So it's taken away all of the angst about, you know, how am I going to juggle all these things? How am I going to get these things to happen? And if you call in the morning, we will guarantee that somebody is at your house by the time you need it. So things like that, you can imagine how that has changed people's lives. Just knowing you've got this security line helping you. And now I can't start the business, so I'm going to have to think of something else to do. Yeah.
Do you think this is a trend among other universities also?
Yeah, I think it is a trend. We've had a lot of interaction with other universities where we participate in different sort of organizations. One of them is called the MIT 9, which was started by Chuck Vest when he was president of MIT. We meet regularly, and the presidents actually meet to talk about these issues. And then faculty meet with us on some occasions, and they meet separately with each other on other occasions, and we're sharing best practices. So yeah, I think it is.
How about the West Coast?
Actually, Stanford's in the MIT 9, Berkeley's in the MIT 9. Yeah. So we're trying, you know, and we're trying to learn from each other. You know, everyone has thought about focusing on a separate issue, and if it works, the rest of us are looking at ways to adopt it. Really critical, yeah.
So I read in the newspaper there was this bill passed by the White House recently about instituting some sort of workshops to eradicate gender biases. Do you have anything on that, or what's the emerging?
Yeah, I saw that too. I think it all falls under the old-fashioned term consciousness raising. I think one of the things, and the University of Michigan has been tremendously effective at focusing on just raising recognition and understanding of the issues that we have been talking about among its faculty. And I think that workshop is intended to do precisely that. I think it's a good idea. Yes.
You said when you became president, you had to, you could not take time for research and so on. And at that point, you felt it was work. So at what point does one, am I, okay, I have done enough work, I have done all that I could.
You know, I think you. All I can say is that I think you know when it happens. If you have any self-knowledge at all. I'm not saying everybody does, by the way, but here's how I knew. I would get applications for postdocs. Postdocs would write and ask to apply to come to the lab, and I would invite a number of them to come and visit. And usually I could offer them 5 different ideas that they would work on. I'd sit down and say, here, I've got this idea, and this idea, and this, and blah, blah, blah. And I never have enough postdocs for the ideas that I had sort of rolling around up there. And I could feel that changing. I could feel that, suddenly I didn't have 5 ideas. I had maybe 3, and I wasn't sure about 2 of them. And so I just felt inside that I wasn't as creative as I had been. I wasn't as innovative. Now, I was doing fine science. It wasn't that. It was that I didn't have that same, just feel like I had the bit between my teeth. And so you just know. I don't know how else to describe it.
So some of the people I know, they actually, like in computer science, they are very sort of, they have a really long creative career.
Yeah.
Like, how do they manage it?
And I think
Do they have a particular way of nurturing creativity or something like that?
well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, the greatness of human diversity is that there will be people with different rhythms in their careers and in their creativity. The second thing is actually a more practical issue, and that is one of the flaws in the system is that as you get more and more senior in your field, you become more and more distracted from your science. You know, so by the time I was having these thoughts about, I'm really not as on top of my game as I used to be, I was running a genomics institute here at Princeton. I was on, 5 scientific advisory boards of other universities, visiting committees. I was on, the NIH Directors Advisory Committee. I was editing a journal. It's a nightmare, right? I mean, where is the time to sit and think about your science when suddenly and teaching, and so I think one of my great deep beliefs about scientific creativity is that you need to be focused in on it. And I also think that's why it's great that we in this country allow young scientists their head early in their careers. Because I think when you're early in your career, you don't have all that other stuff that is pulling you in multiple directions and distracting you from the thing that you do well. So when you look at the scientists who are still creative, relatively late in their careers, I'll bet what you see are people who just said no to all those other things, or are so incompetent when asked to do those other things. And they're, it's true, right? Not everybody is good at running a meeting. It's just true. That they have really been able to stay focused on the work. That's part of that explanation. Yes?
So what are the flexibilities that you think should be incorporated in the academic system to make it a good place for women, a woman, so that she can carry on both family as well as academic?
Well, probably the most important thing is you want to build in the time that is inevitable that you need if you're going to have children. So we have a policy at Princeton that you get an extra year on the tenure clock for every child that you have as an assistant professor, male or female. And you get that extra year whether you ask for it or you don't. So we used to have the policy where if you ask for the extra year, you get it. And we found that men ask for it more than women. So that was not the intention of the policy. This was a problem, the unintended consequences. So what we did was make the year automatic. Now, you could come in and say, I don't need that extra year on the 10 o'clock, I'd like to come up early. Great, absolutely fine. But if you've had a child, you get an extra year for every single child. And because I chair the tenure committee of every single faculty member at Princeton, I am constantly on the watch for the one potential flaw in this system, which is a committee saying, well, it's been 9 years since she's been here. Surely she should have done more than the person who has been here and not had children and had 6 years. So that is not allowed to come into the conversation. Right? The point of these extra years is that you need that extra time. So that's number one. Number two is really good daycare. That allows you to feel completely comfortable about leaving your child in the morning and picking the child up at night. So really, really excellent, affordable daycare is number two. Number three are watching really carefully the practices of the university and how they play out for parents of young children. So I'll give you the classic example, scheduling seminars at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This doesn't work for a parent, right? A parent who has to get to the daycare center by 6 o'clock, you're going to miss that seminar. Starting meetings at 7:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't work. So we monitor that kind of thing and say that we are going to work in the hours where it's possible for parents to participate fully in all of the activities in the university. So all of those are really important. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you get an extra year for male and female.
Yep.
And this sort of makes me think of something that Dana Randall said a couple of days ago. She said that some of her male colleagues got some extra time when they had kids, but they used that extra time to not have to teach, and they just did extra research, and the women are sort of like, I mean, I don't know the solution, because I like the idea of having maternal leave too, because they have to develop the kids, you know, I mean, that's a great system, but it's hard to tell if that's what they're using.
So we have two policies, and you've identified precisely the debate that we had at Princeton, which is if you make it female specific, what you do is you have a policy that says women are parents, men aren't. Not good, not good. So we have two policies. One is the extra year in the tenure clock, which is done gender neutral. But then we have a separate policy, which is work relief. And you have to demonstrate that you are the primary child care deliverer to get work relief, meaning off teaching. And both can't. You know, if both of them are on our faculty, which we do have examples of, you both can't. They have to decide between themselves which of them is really the person who is truly the primary child care giver, and we see that actually both happen. But you're right, there's no perfect solution here. Absolutely. Now, I am unfortunately very conscious of the fact that I have a lunch that I have to attend at 12:15 back in my office. So I am going to have to, and you probably are getting hungry. You've probably got a lot of hypoglycemia here in the audience right now. But I want to just say how much I've enjoyed being with all of you and how much I hope this workshop gives you real networks and strength and exciting new ideas in computer science. So thank you.